Introduce innovative technologies into military bases. I'm John Marszewski, the Vice President for Smart Cover. Before proceeding, I do want to cover a couple topics. First, I want to thank the National Association of Water Companies for enabling today's webinar. And I also want to let everybody know that today's session is being recorded and it will be available for follow-on viewing. With that, I want to introduce our moderator for today, Commissioner Mary-Anna Holden. She was appointed by Governor Christie and confirmed as a member of the New Jersey Bureau of Public Utilities back in January 2012, and she was reappointed by Governor Murphy in 2018. Prior to her nomination, she served as mayor of the borough of Madison for 4 years and a councilwoman for 10 years. She has a very busy calendar, as you're about to hear. She's a at-large board member of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, otherwise known as NAWC, and immediate past chair of its Committee on Water. She also serves on the subcommittee on nuclear issues, waste disposal, critical infrastructure, military workforce development, and the DOE NAWC Nuclear Energy Partnership. She has done a number of various major tasks for NAWC, including the handbook for board members and utility rate training. She's also locally the member of the Jersey Waterworks Green Infrastructure Committee, Clean Water Council, and National Council on Electricity Policy. She also works on boards and chair of University of Missouri's Financial Research Institute, the Center for Public Utilities at New Mexico State University, and is past president of the Mid-Atlantic Conference of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, otherwise known as MAC Group. She's also a member of the National Regulatory Research Institute Advisory Board. She was born in Tarrytown, New York, received a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the College of New Rochelle, and a Master of Arts in Humanities and American Art and Architecture from Manhattanville College. So with that, Commissioner Holden, I turn over the chair to you.
Thank you, John. That's a wonderful introduction. It's either that or my obituary. It can serve either way. But I'm very happy to be here today and moderating the panel on military contracts. A lot of news lately about swirling around different bases, and particularly Air Force bases, and challenges of treating the water around it. But as part of the challenges that are out there, I think there's a lot of opportunities given all the new technological innovation that we hope to talk about today. I'm going to just give a brief introduction to each panelist, and I'm going to, before they speak, and each panelist is going to tell a little bit about themselves and give an introduction to this topic. And the first person we have is John Simpson. It's John on the screen. I have Sean on the screen. Anyway, we can always start with Sean. You're there. Sean Wheatley is a proud Army veteran, go Army, beat Navy, who is currently the Vice President of Operations for American Water's Military Services Group, with nearly 40 years in the water and wastewater industry. Sean, take it away.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me as part of this panel. It is great to be here and share with industry leaders about so many things that's happening around our country. As we say, I'm a proud veteran, was in the military for 10 years, and I have some insight on some of the challenges that they face each and every day, especially when it comes to the warfighter and the quality of life for those service members that serve our country each and every day. So just excited to be here to talk about some of the challenges that they face. And it's a wide variety of changing things that they have to deal with out there. I mean, everything from recapitalization of the system to treatment issues as far as their plants are concerned, some climate variability issues that are going on across our country, different testings and requirements that have been identified by the EPA. All of these things are just building up and causing problems that we must deal with and learn to deal with, not just the military or the government themselves, but us as industry leaders. We must learn to adapt to some of the changes and how do we plan and go forward and to make a better life for those service members that serve us each and every day. But we can't leave it there, Mary-Anna. We can't leave it there because this is not just a military issue. It is an issue facing our entire country, throughout the world, really. A lot of different problems that we have to deal with, a lot of challenges that we need to think about and collaborate and overcome. So I'm just glad to be here to talk about that, and maybe we can really get some things moving with the help of so many important people in the country and in this business. I believe that we can make some quality changes that's really going to improve the life of our citizens, not just military and the warfighter, but all of the citizens across the country. So happy to be here and discuss with you all.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Now, John Simpson, Dr. John Simpson. He is the director of the Office of Water Security at Marine Corps Installations West and Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton. With 20 years in the Navy, I'm sorry, but I'm an Army, dyed-in-the-wool Army fan. We won't hold it against you. With 20 years in the Navy and background in civil engineering and his doctorate in policy, planning, and development. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Now I can.
Good. Yeah, I was having a lot of problems with my connection. Thank you. I guess I'm just here to talk about the wastewater and water operations on Camp Pendleton and the technologies that we have been able to employ to help the fact that we're never going to invest in maintenance of our systems or keep our systems up to state of the art. So having the technologies that we'll discuss has really helped us prevent spills and also prevent overflowing reservoirs and killing endangered species. So I'm here to discuss our stuff and learn from the rest of you.
Great, thank you. And batting cleanup is Alex Beehler. Alex Beehler, Esquire, has accumulated 25 years of practicing law while also serving federal agencies such as the Department of Justice and Department of Defense. Recently, he served as the 8th Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installations, Energy, and Environment. Alex?
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and thank you, John, for having me as part of this panel. I have always thought that issues related to water, and certainly came up time and time in my 2 times in the Pentagon, are so important and yet do not get the focus they deserve until some sort of calamity occurs and then there's a mad scramble. And I think that basically is the challenge that we all face in this area as professionals. Water intrinsically is way underpriced given its true market value, and people, and that includes the military, just assume it's always there and it's always available and it's always of good quality. And there's so many things that occur, that are occurring, that will challenge this, and we need to be responsive to it. I come and will present a perspective from the 50,000 foot level, given my past experience at the Pentagon and the Army. And in a nutshell, in order to make progress, we need top down and bottom up. And by that, I mean, we need a commitment from the military top secretariat leaders and the leadership of the Department of Defense to make this a priority issue. hand in glove with the newfound focus on the importance of climate, because water supply and water quality, the absence of which goes directly to mission capability the same way as the challenges in climate, and conversely bottom up, in which those forward leaning at the installation level take initiatives and have support of their installation leadership, which my understanding, Mr. Simpson is the perfect exemplar of that initiative. So I look forward to the discussion and turn it back to you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Well, we've got a diverse group, but a very experienced group here. And, you know, as I've stated earlier, you know, there's been a lot of major issues of concern that have been in the press only recently, but, you know, it has to be many of the threats to water supply, not only at the, you know, in general, but also at military installations, it poses a unique threat. If you lose your military, you lose your security, you're really in trouble. So Sean, I want to ask, you know, what are the major issues of concern or the emerging threats that the government has as it relates to military water and wastewater systems? And do you have any bright technological solutions for them? That's a big question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for the question itself. A lot of things to be discussed when we look at the threats that are facing our military bases across the country. One of the biggest ones I would say is a lot of the assets that our military rely on, they are from the 1940s. So the pipings, the hydrants, and all of those things are quite a few years old, and they're deteriorating, and they're coming to the point that they are well past their useful life. So with that comes a lot of challenges, right? You have the pipe in the ground that's corroding. You have bacteriological issues that are popping up all over the place. You have consent orders that are being levied against our military installations because they lack the funding to move forward and make some of these corrections along the way. And it's so far gone that it's past their ability to come in and really make those changes. And this is why UP, utility privatization is a good way for the military to attack this. Bring in the system experts that know how to do this, that know how to recapitalize those systems, to know how to use that, and really bring those systems up to standard. And this is something that we specialize in. But when we look at the piping across the business and all of these assets that are failing, then we bring in some of the lead and copper rules and the changes that go along with that. And we see that really affecting our military housing communities. And again, this is just a result of things failing over time and lack of attention being given to these assets. But we also need to talk about just a couple of other things. When we look at climate variabilities, that's a big threat that's really facing our country as a whole, the world as a whole. So that's something that we would definitely need to bring into that. The fiscal constraints that the military has, and the ability to get the funding and to apply it where it needs to go. So that's another area that really needs to be focused on and to be looked at. And some that we don't necessarily think about all the time when we look about the staffing challenges and the maturing workforce that we have. And we don't have a lot of people that's entering into this business, the utility businesses. So this is really creating a really large problem that we need to learn how to overcome. So again, some of the things, and really just with this question, some of the improvements that can be made, the technical advancements, is really just replacing assets, bringing in some more reliable piping, things that don't contain lead and copper. Just those small things will really make a big change in our military, in the health and welfare of the war fighters and the government personnel that actually work on the installations. And again, this is another example of something that we can take outside of the gates of our military and apply it to every community that we have. Our water industry is really facing, and wastewater industry, we're facing a lot of challenges that the solutions are really not difficult. But I really believe that the solutions are just somebody in the government place, and leaderships really making the decision to make a change in this area. And if we focus on those things and bring about those little technological changes, that will really make a big difference. And if we can start at that level, I believe that we can definitely move up to more advanced technologies that's available, things that can help us with leak detection and a lot of other things that are available today that we can utilize just to make this whole utility field, a better place. And again, the whole focus is making things reliable for the customer.
Right, you touched on one of my favorite topics, which most people don't want to talk about, and that's wastewater. And I often say there's gold in that wastewater, but the problem is dealing with it and dealing with we look right now at Florida with all the incursion of seawater that's going to be going into systems and
Sure.
inflow and infiltration. And how do you deal with that and the climate changes? And if either you, Sean or John, you have experience at Camp Pendleton, that how do you improve your wastewater system with technology?
I can see a project that we're piloting right now. We're in the last stages waiting for the report, so then I'll put a MILCON together. We're also trying for some state funding from the state of California for indirect potable recharge, right? So all of our southern system is our bigger system. We're two separate state permitted water systems, and the southern system's the larger one. So my wastewater plant sees about 2.2 million gallons a day of wastewater, and we currently reclaim about 600,000 gallons that goes to the golf course, horse pastures, a parade deck, the recovery garden at the hospital. But our goal is to take every bit of wastewater that comes into that plant and reclaim it and put it back in our southern system aquifer, because we're on groundwater. So instead of sending it out the oceanside outfall, we would put it into the aquifer, and that enhances our water security. But we also have a conjunctive use project that was a settlement of a 68-year-old lawsuit with the city of Fallbrook that allows us to sell water, our groundwater. We owe them their water allocation that's in the lawsuit, but above that, we actually get to sell them water and make money that goes into a pot that we can do projects with, and it helps with some of our utility bills. So we gave $65,000, which doesn't seem like much, toward because we only had a few months of this project going, but we reduced the amount that we needed funding for of our utility bill by $65,000 by what we sold to Fallbrook. And then another 117 went into a pot that we can then do projects with. So for us, wastewater in the state of California, nothing should be going out our ocean outfalls, but brine from reclaimed systems.
Are you finding that, detecting leaks? A lot of talk has been about recently has been about cross-contamination between, potable water and your wastewater facilities. Are there things or techniques that you look for that, or how you do perhaps your asset management on at the camp?
Actually, the actual California Water Code and then our Camp Pendleton requirements requires water systems, any piping, to be at least 10 foot above all the wastewater piping. So we haven't had a lot of cross-contamination of water wastewater. We've had spills, manholes and lift stations backing up, but we'll talk about that later, how Smart Covers has prevented a number of spills for us by, we have a 24-hour group of people who go to lift stations, but now they have tablets in their vehicles that tell them, give them an alarm that a lift station has hit a critical juncture. You need to go find out what's going on. And they've been able to go to a lift station, or they've been able to go to a manhole and prevent a spill. We haven't had zero spills, but we've gone from a consent decree with surf riders because we had so many spills to onesie twosies.
That's great. I've been down in those lift stations. It's not fun. So, but Alex, let me ask you, the part of the threat is not just a, physical threat or contamination of what you're going to ingest, or perhaps improperly processing wastewater. But can you, give us some examples of some of the other threats that might be on a water system or that you have seen and that the Department of Defense is worried about?
Well, first and foremost, whatever happens to the grid system, access to energy would affect the whole water system. And so securing the grid, and if in emergency situations, making sure that there is, at least in the Army, and I believe this is generally guidance across the Department of Defense with all services, 14 days worth of 24/7 access to power, which would obviously in part drive the water system, is certainly a significant concern and goal. And to help make sure that you have backup emergency power for the grid, each of the services now has done what they call black start exercises, where they literally shut off access to the commercial grid, in some cases with very little advance notice, and see how the backup systems actually work. And that's been well worth every dime that exercise might cost, because you learn, and they've learned so much from it and been able to make effective improvements. There's another more basic challenge, very mundane, but very basic. And that is the vast majority of both energy and water systems are not metered at the building level. They're basically metered as the product enters the installation, but then there have been very slow to put in effective metering across the installation and bases that would obviously track how much is being used, where there might be significant problems, and then the ability to correct that. Progress has been made toward this, but the progress is very slow. There's always the concern of cybersecurity across the board, and the services are only beginning to get their hands around it. It's not for lack of money, but it is for a lack of an effective game plan that can be implemented and across on an installation by installation basis. And then finally, one thing to throw in and to build upon what Mr. Simpson just commented on, are as a way forward, or an approach called the Intergovernmental Support Agreements, which basically helps installations, and in some cases even group of neighboring installations, to draw upon the expertise and the service capabilities of the surrounding community to provide capabilities in, say, wastewater or water. It's across the board at many of the municipal services. And interestingly enough, just last month, Fort Irwin in, I guess it's mid-California, entered into an agreement with the city of Barstow, where the city will provide under this intergovernmental support agreement the wastewater capabilities for whole Fort Irwin. That's a big deal. And of course, we'll have to see how effective it is. But if it is effective, then that could be very helpful in providing the reliable service that every single installation and base needs.
Yeah, there's always bad actors anywhere. Probably the loosest thing is not doing training with your personnel and keeping things up to date. But are there ways that you can talk about some of these risks and what technology can help to kind of deter those bad actors in your system?
Well, I would welcome, I think, the technology, other panelists would probably have better significance. It's frankly, in broadness, it is to get data of the systems operating that can be easily analyzed and therefore action taken upon it. And that goes back to my earlier point. In order to have data, you have to have good meters that are A, installed, and B, operational. I mean, this is so basic and fundamental, and yet it is missing both the presence of the meters, and once again, I'm including the electric measures, which are of course more significant and numerous than water, but they go, to my mind, they go hand in glove. So what you're absolutely right. What you needed is the meters, needed to make sure that they're operational. It is personnel to be able to effectively operate and collect the data and have it analyzed. And this goes, so that's at the installation level, but it goes back up to the top down. It has to be made a priority among the leadership of each of the service, just as take your crisis du jour, whether it's base housing or the tackling PFAS, PFOA contamination of water. It has to be something that the leadership directs through, in the Army's case, the installation command, that this is a priority, that the garrison commanders will be held responsible to make sure that things are running smoothly. That in turn they need to rely upon the deputy garrison commander, who is a civilian and who has continuity, could be there 20 years and has much greater familiarity with base operations, and then the appropriate director of public works officials. But the military, the hierarchy comes down and pushes what is important. And I think that's key. It has to be, frankly, written into job descriptions. And this is, by analogy, this is what happened with the whole housing crisis.
Yeah.
And I think that would help make change. There's a lot of institutional things that need to be done. Just quickly, long-range planning for adequate operation and maintenance of installations. Certainly in the Army, that gets shortchanged. It's maybe at 65 to 70% on an ongoing basis what needs to be funded to make sure that the capital plan is working and up to snuff. And one of the things that was done in the Army while I was in the position I was in, first time ever, there was an approved by the Army leadership of an Army installation strategy that gave guidelines and direction on how funding and other important goals should be achieved over a 20 to 35 year period. And they're then supporting plans to implement this, drawing upon energy and water, how to adapt to climate issues, how to assess it. It's all interconnected. And the more holistic approach that the services have toward the importance of their maintaining their installation and bases, the better each component will perform. And as I used to say, no longer are installations operating in operation. Basically, the fence line has become the front line. And I think that leadership, as well as leadership at the Pentagon, as well as at the installation level, need to be and reminded of that and need to act in accordance.
That's a perfect segue to Sean. American Water really has been taking on a leadership role. You can take these strategies, these long-term strategies, but you've got to have the people with the expertise and the technology to go into these military installations and say, okay, this is what we recommend to run your system and what needs to be done. Can you talk about I know you can talk about, would you talk about some of the technologies that you've employed, particularly as you confront, some of the climate and climate resilience and conservation?
Sure, and if I could just follow behind that great explanation that Alex has just provided to us. I really like what you said, Alex. It's a holistic approach, really looking at all of the areas of concern, whether that's a threat in cybersecurity, to failing infrastructure, to all of those types of things that we have to deal with, and climate, the climate issues across the country. If you would look at drought.gov, they would tell you that the majority of our Midwest and West Coast cities, they're actually categorized as at a minimum severe drought. So how do we deal with that? Are there technologies out there to help us move forward? And the short answer is yes, right? There are a lot of technologies that we can use to really deal with that type of issue that we're facing across the country. One is the reverse osmosis systems that we do have, and the ability to treat brackish or seawater. That is a great example of how we could help those suffering communities that are going through, and their water allocations have been reduced simply because of the drought that they're in. Alex brought up the metering, being able to meter and really determining where we are losing water, what water we're putting out, what water is going into our wastewater treatment plants, and doing some math there and figure out where we're losing water, how do we correct that. The leak detection, like smart cover, things that can help us, manage and monitor the manholes that we have, and really just diving into our SCADA systems, where we're really able to see real time what's happening across our utilities. And this is something that we tend to lack at a lot of different places. And I would say that things are improving, but really just diving into those technologies that are there and ready to be used. And again, agreeing with the panelists that leadership and the government needs to take on this holistic approach, that we're going to repair the system, that we're going to do what we can to put programs and technology in place to help us avoid some of the catastrophes that are definitely ahead of us. but we can get ahead of that now. And something else, I hate to keep running behind you there, Alex, but you brought up the blackouts that the military is using and determining, how reliable are the systems? Are we resilient? And American Water ourselves, we have been through several of those, right? And we have fared really, really well. Again, just the power of utility privatization. We come in, we recapitalize the system. We bring in experts to run the system. I'm going to call that, if I can, if you give me some liberty, Mary-Anna, that's a technology all in its own. Bringing in a system expert, that we do this each and every day. We have a bench strength across American Water, over 7,000 employees, almost in every state. So we have the ability to go in, and each time they have run that blackout, we have fared, again, really, really well. The systems have been maintained. We've been able to maintain water and absolutely no SSOs, no sewer spills across the systems. And we were out of power for sometimes over 12 hours. So the technology is there, the expertise is there. But again, that holistic approach, what can we do to repair and fix our systems across the country? And again, especially, I just want to reiterate the issues that we're facing on the West Coast with the drought conditions and some of the areas there, they have their water allocations cut so low that they have to find different ways to do this, right? So again, the technologies of the desalination equipment and all of those things, metering to deal with different types of leaks and identify those leaks and repair those leaks so we'll know what's going on. So just all of those things will help us. And again, if I can go back where I started, pipe replacement. A lot of the water that's being lost across these communities is simply because it's outdated infrastructure, right? There are leaks that we don't have leak detection in place. We don't know really what's happening. But if we could get our eyes on the system, use the technology that's available, we surely could make this a better place. And one great way to do that is through utility privatization.
Sean, you and John have both touched on smart cover. Many people on this call may not know what that is. So could you explain how you deploy smart cover in your technology scope?
Sure, I'll turn it over to John. I don't want to keep talking.
Oh, well, you give a bigger view, and then John has a specific thing he's been doing in Camp Pendleton, so it kind of puts the icing on the cake.
Sure.
But,
Sure. Again, we use it at several of our military installations across the country, and what it does is help us determine, flows that's going through the manholes, and we're able to, from that information, tie that into some of our SCADA systems, and from that information, we're actually able to see, right, if there's a leak, right, if there's a high level of I&I going through these systems. And again, just having the ability to see what's happening, Mary-Anna, that is the greatest piece of technology that we can have, the ability to see. And once we know what's happening, we're able to come in and make corrections, make repairs, cameraing a line to see what's going on there. Maybe it's even a situation of no flow, right? And to prevent us from having a sanitary sewer overflow. We're able to see that, recognize it, and deploy someone to that site to determine what the problem is. So with that, John, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
great, thank you. Great movement. So John, you've talked about how you've been using smart cover, and maybe you can get into a little more into the weeds here about, how it's been, if it has been successful, how it's been successful for you.
Absolutely. But our path to smart covers, I think Alex's, the things that he's brought out, he has brought out, bear me touching on just for a few seconds, right?
Sure.
So
Please.
we look at the 50,000 foot level, and we go down to the level I've been at as a division director and now at the region. But what Alex talked about kind of brings up the fact that we have a Department of Energy, but we don't have a Department of Water.
Right.
His title had energy, installations, and the environment in it, right? So water is often lumped in with the energy guys. Hey, you're a CEM, you're an energy manager. Oh, now you're a water manager, right? That's why we don't have meters for water. We have a lot more electric meters because we have reimbursable customers for both, but we have no water meters other than, and we do our own water. It's on base, it's ours, and it's our fault, right? We're not taking it from somebody else. We take it out of the ground, we process it, we send it out to our reservoirs that goes to our customers. And then from there, we take the wastewater, dispose of it. But we have no water meters. I don't know where my leaks are. In fact, our GIS is so bad and underfunded, I don't know where all my infrastructure is, let alone its condition. So when American Water wants to talk about coming in and looking, they just put their hands up going, whoa, we can't help you guys. What? You guys don't even know where your stuff is. Let us help you find your stuff. Then we'll do a condition assessment on it. And then we'll talk about privatization. Although we've privatized some things and it's more expensive, right? If we're not going to invest at that top level in water, wastewater anyway, why is it okay to invest even more to get it right? So that's my perspective as somebody who ran a bunch of government employees where my water operators had position descriptions from the 1970s, right? It still says they're using liquid chlorine. None of the advanced water treatment. We have an RO system, we have an LGAC system. None of that stuff's in their position descriptions because they're written in the 70s. So these guys are paid as if they're journeyman carpenters, not as if they're advanced water treatment plant operators. And then we've contracted out our wastewater treatment plants because their PDs had nothing in them that we could ever compete with the outside to pay these guys enough to operate our plants. So we go through that whole process. I cornered John Conger when he was DOD EI&E one time. And I said, hey, sir, we built the pyramids and the Great Wall of China without electricity, but we've never built and never will build anything without water. What's up? And he said, well, I have a $400 million energy bill and a $4 million water bill. Which one do you want me to focus on? Because as you move up the chain, at the division level, I did crisis management. Now I do catastrophe management. I can only imagine what they do in the Pentagon as far as having to prioritize things. But at the end of the day, I really wish we could come back around to the realization that water, along with energy, are lifeline services. You can't do anything anymore without those two. So having a brand new jet or having a brand new whatever is great, but if you got nowhere to land it, and if it lands there, can't take back off, it doesn't matter. So all of that brought me to smart covers because we had reservoirs out all of Camp Pendleton's 200 square miles. And we had reservoirs on top of hills where they belong. Up there, we had some power, luckily, to put lighting, but my guys had to drive their trucks up the top of the hill in rainstorms and mudslides to take the reservoir levels by looking at them. And then if they needed to be filled, they had to drive back down the hill and do the valve alignment for 10 miles to fill that reservoir and start the booster pump to fill it, and then look at their own watches to say, okay, I'm filling at this rate. When do I have to stop? So what smart covers did for us was same as wastewater. In the truck now, the guys had level indication. So they could look across all of our reservoirs and say, here's what the levels are. I need to go fill this one. Because before that, they'd go to a reservoir and say, well, it doesn't really need to be filled now, but it will be by the time I get back to it, so I'll just start filling it. So we had no effective process to keep our reservoirs filled. Smart cover allowed them to, okay, what's my lowest reservoir? I'll go there. We still had to do the alignment of the valves manually until SCADA came online, which SCADA brings another issue for us that if it was part of smart covers, it would have been great. But like Alex said, getting those technologies in, they didn't want to rot. So in those areas, they don't have fiber, right? So you can't hook in SCADA and make the valves up there work as mechanical valves because there is no fiber up to those reservoirs. So if smart cover had that advanced technology to be able to, and maybe Sean has that technology to to use the same satellite mechanism where they can control the valves, that would be great. But when we finally did get fiber to those locations, we still don't have an authority to operate an ATO. Years later, we invested in it, but because the fiber is in the same bundle, it's a dark fiber, but it's still in a bundle with other fibers that have our internet on it, and our MXN, our LAN system, and our SuperNet. So they won't give us an ATO because theoretically, I guess somebody could hack through that fiber into the other fibers around them. I'm not sure how you do that, but what I asked them is if smart cover is air gapped, it's not on the system. You can never come in through smart cover and hack into our LAN system or hack into our SuperNet, because it's not only air gapped, it's miles gapped. So that was another hope that I had. But now we do have the fiber, and we do use a traditional SCADA system, and we don't have an authority to operate.
Oh, I think we just lost your sound.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
We lost your sound. There, now you're back.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, did you hear? We operate every day without an authority to operate because we have to. You can't shut down the base. So that's what and if you looked at the rest of our utilities, gas, Sean, our gas system that injured a bunch of Marines because it hit a line that we didn't know about. We still haven't solved that problem.
Hey, John, I definitely would love to speak with you and the leadership at the base there, because, everything that you mentioned, we have been able to overcome, at the 17 installations that we currently have, soon to be 18 with the naval base Maypoint down in Florida. But we have all those things. And you mentioned that we come in and look at it and say, we can't help you because you don't have your assets and things identified. That's kind of not the way we operate. We'll come in and look at what you have, and we will build from there. So we are more than happy to come and speak with you and the team there about how we can help and be a part of rebuilding that infrastructure, getting you the SCADA that you need. And definitely we have an outstanding GIS department that's able to come in, identify assets. And usually when we privatize a base, that's one of the first things that we do is start looking at those assets and rebuilding the mapping and the GIS system. So we would love the opportunity to be able to come in and share and maybe kick around some ideas and just see how we can help, because we have been successful 17 times, soon to be 18, in the next few months with this exact same process on military bases across the country. So let us know.
I'm sorry if I misspoke. What I meant to say, or what I tried to say, was we did have folks come in, and that's what we needed to do prior. We needed them to go through and do the mapping, do the GIS, do the condition assessment, and that's what they wanted to do. But we tried to jump right to privatization.
Sure.
And the company said, well, wait, before you're trying to give us a bag of goods because we don't know what you have. So that is the exact first step that we needed to do, and that they said, before we privatize, we need to know what you have. And then we would have had to invest all that money in knowing what we had, and that's what they didn't do.
All right. Yeah. Anytime, we would love to have a conversation about it. However we can help.
Alex, you have your hand raised.
Well, thank you. And I'll be very quick because I know we want to get to questions from the viewers. So to John's very valid point early in his last set of comments, that there is no water in any, say, for instance, my former title or that equivalent in the other services or DOD. Reflective of that, the only service at the secretariat level that has a designated water policy expert, it's one person in the Army, and that person is currently the acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Energy and Sustainment, which admittedly water is part of the portfolio, but in significance, a very small part. So there's and prior to that, the position was vacant for several years before it was filled. So that symbolically is the challenge that I was referring to and that John certainly picked up on. And I'll make one broad sweeping comment. Military recruits those who join the military very rarely join the military to become proficient in issues related to utilities. It's basically the boring part of military operations writ large. But it can't, just because it would appear to be boring, it cannot be ignored and becomes increasingly important for all the reasons that we have discussed, which makes just that much more sense that if it's important but boring, you want to make sure that it's done by entities, and hence privatization, of experts who don't think it's boring. It's their lifeline and their experience and capability and cutting edge innovation that you defer, you contract with them to get the job done and continue getting the job done. So the Army has been pretty good in the privatization realm. They're roughly at 50% of their operations, significant basis, are privatized in the utility area. But obviously, each of the services could do more, and so more to come in that area. Thank you. I will lower my hand.
Besides digging latrines, there's not much expertise that's required when you first come into the service. But I certainly hear what John is saying, because when I worked on the military task force for NAWC, we found the same thing that you're describing. The job descriptions are so out of date across the board that people didn't realize that if they realigned some of the descriptions, and that's on the utility side as well, there are skill sets that translate both ways in the industry. And that's one of the things we tried to break down and say, and encourage, you've got to update your job descriptions, and we have to update ours. And what's on one resume, you've got to be able to look into that resume and say, oh no, that skill set would actually work over here in this utility. And it's a constant battle, and just people don't want to, unfortunately, address it. But back on our topic, I just want to open this up for the last few minutes we have. Are there any questions from the audience? I don't see any hands raised. I want to go back on one thing with using smart technologies.
I think we have one there. I think
Is there-
Steve Curtis.
I don't see Steve. You want to unmute yourself?
Hello, I'm on the call, but I don't have my hand up. So
Okay. You're watching Sean, I know.
yes, ma'am.
Actually, there's a little hand up there. Oh, I thought that was
Oh, maybe I pressed the wrong button. I apologize.
Okay. All right. I guess I just, if there are things in closing, if, John, I'm going to start with you. If you had your druthers, what kinds of technology or what kind of help would you be looking for in the future, or improvements?
Again, I'll go back to some Alex, you know, for someone at the 50,000 foot level touched on all of it, right? Meter. We water meters would be extremely helpful, both to determine if and where our leaks might be. A GIS like Sean talked about and a condition assessment that we do very well on the wastewater side because we're in a lawsuit, consent decree. But then, and then you just talked about the position descriptions, right? So I had to go through the chain of command, and I actually have all my water operators who are certified water operators have to be to operate the plants, get a 25% retention pay. And that's gotten them up closer to what they could make if they went and worked for Fallbrook or Oceanside or any of the special districts around us. But up at the top level, and I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name because Alex is right. They had one gentleman a while back who was a water expert. He wrote the Army's water security strategy. Shoot, he was an anthropologist guy, and I met him. I met him in the Pentagon. I think all of us would benefit from having at least some expertise, even if it's just working with, you know, if American Water takes over, there still needs to, there's inherently governmental functions that I think it would benefit us to have. A water expert that goes back and forth with American Water or goes up and down the chain of command that specializes in that knowledge. I don't think it's a big investment, but I think it would pay a lot of dividends to have someone in the chain of command who's not an energy manager or not a utilities manager, but is connected to the water stuff.
Well, all three of you have touched on my pet peeve, which is that whenever they say, oh, there's the water energy nexus, it's always water for energy. And no one wants to talk about all the energy it takes to pump, process, whatever, or desalinate water. And that's a constant battle for us at NAWC in the Water Committee. We're trying to improve that. Sean, you have closing thoughts of things you'd like to see improve or things that commissioners could help you with?
Sure, I definitely agree with John and Alex and yourself and everything that was said about all the different improvements that we need, everything from GIS to metering across the installation to leak detection to understanding the cyber security issues that we're having. And lastly, you know, the climate conditions that we're dealing with across the country and across the world. These are the things where we need to focus. And again, as I said in my opening statement, I believe that we can get there. You know, we pull our heads together and we commit to getting buy-in. Maybe I'll put it that way, from some of the leadership across the country, the government leaders, of how important water is and what it takes to do this. And you know, a lot of times you spoke about the high electrical bill, you know, and a lot of times the electrical bill is so high, it's not assigned to the water because we don't have electrical meters at some of the treatment plants across our military bases. So they cannot just dig down and say, how much does it actually cost for me to treat a gallon of water, whether it's water or wastewater? Do we have those numbers? So all of that information, I believe, will be helpful in helping us move forward and provide, you know, the changes and the technology that's needed for us to be successful. And again, and last thing I'll say is, you know, definitely utility privatization. I know it's just sometimes considered one tool in the toolbox, but it's a very effective tool that has been proven year over year. I believe we're going into almost 25 years of this, to the 2688, and trying to implement that. So that is definitely a way to go to help us get where we want to be. So thanks so much for having me as part of the panel. Really enjoyed being here.
Great. And I just want to say that we love the privatized companies because I get to regulate them and I get to watch over you, which no one's watching over some of these municipal systems and perhaps the military systems. Alex, I want to give you the final word here before we turn it over to John.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a great discussion. And I will say, and I guess pun intended, hierarchy authority in the military flows downhill just like water. And we've mentioned this before, that obviously needs to be better focused, but it can be done. I'll do the analogy. You know, there was no energy in any of the titles that I had or my compatriots had until 2007, what had been the normal price of a gallon of gas that the military, or fuel that the military had, I think was $2.19. All of a sudden, the cost of oil went to $140 a barrel right at the time of the Iraqi and Afghanistan situations, creating a $20 billion unfunded obligation on the military. And that was when, on top of the mission compromise of exposed energy and water convoys, and that made Secretary Rumsfeld basically say, what's going on here and how do we correct this problem? And out of that sprang the whole sections of energy within the Pentagon leadership. So unfortunately, I have a feeling that it'll take something dramatic happening with regard to water, similarly to what happened with regard to energy and fuel use. But if the leadership is there, things can happen in a very positive way. So let's hope that occurs.
Great. John, Sean, and Alex, thank you so much for your knowledge and sharing it with us. And I'll turn this back to John Markashewski.
Wow, that was a super informative session. There were a lot of comments that I certainly didn't anticipate, but the insights about the mechanisms, what it takes to get this stuff done, are very, very enlightening. So I want to thank the panelists, thank the moderator, Mary-Anna Holden, and all those who attended and supported today's session. And with that, let's
Thank you.
close the session. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.